Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom had earned the nickname of the Grandmother of Europe for the many grandchildren she had. She had 42 grandchildren. This video will focus on the lives of the children of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, Queen Victoria's youngest son. The death of Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, in January 1981 was the end of an era. She was the last surviving grandchild of Queen Victoria and the longest-lived person of royal blood in the British royal family. Born on the 25th of February 1883, Princess Alice was the eldest child of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, and Princess Helene of Waldeck, Pyrmont. She had one brother, Charles Edward. Alice's father had haemophilia, and Alice inherited the gene from her father. When Alice was just 1 year old, her father passed away after falling down a staircase, hitting his head and hemorrhaging. Alice's brother was born after their father's death. Alice and her brother were brought up by their mother in Pyrmont House in Surrey. Her childhood was full of visits to the many relations they had throughout Europe. In November 1903, when Alice was 20 years old, she became engaged to Prince Alexander of Teck, the youngest brother of Mary of Teck, the then Princess of Wales, and the future Queen Mary. Alice and Alexander were wed on the 10th of February 1904, and Alice was escorted down the aisle by her uncle Edward VII. Together, Alice and Alexander had 3 children: May, Rupert and Maurice. Rupert had haemophilia and died from injuries following a car accident in 1928. Maurice died in infancy. In 1917, when George V, Alice's cousin, issued letters patent ordering members of the British royal family to relinquish their German titles, Alice, her husband and their children did so. Alice still remained a Princess of Great Britain and Ireland and a Royal Highness in her own right. The King created Alexander and Alice the Earl and Countess of Athlone. After the First World War, Alice accompanied her husband to South Africa and Canada when her husband was Governor-General of each country. In 1957, Alexander died at the age of 82 and was buried at the Royal Burial Grounds in Frogmore. In 1966, Alice published her memoirs. Because Alice was the oldest surviving member of the British royal family, Alice was often consulted on matters of royal protocol. During the wedding of Princess Anne, Princess Royal, Alice was offered to ride in a carriage, but she refused, as she felt it was not fitting for a princess of her rank. She travelled by car instead. In 1978, Alice had a fall, hurt her shoulder, and was hospitalised for a few days. This marked the beginning of deterioration of her health. By 1980, Alice could no longer walk, and on the 3rd of January 1981, Alice passed away peacefully in her sleep. Members from various European royal families attended her funeral. Alice was buried at the Royal Burial Grounds at Frogmore. Prince Charles Edward was born at Pyrmont House in Surrey on the 19th of July 1884. He was the only son of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, and Princess Helene of Waldeck, Pyrmont. He had one sister, Alice. Charles Edward's father died 3 months before Charles Edward's birth. His father had been interested in the Stuarts, who had lost the British throne, and wanted to name his son Charles Edward for the Charles Edward Stuart, the young pretender, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. Charles Edward was nicknamed Charlie by his family, and he inherited the title of Duke of Albany at birth. Charles Edward was educated at home by a governess before studying St. Royd's School, then Lyndhurst and Eton College. In 1899, Charles Edward became the heir to his uncle's duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and he moved to Germany to continue his education. He attended Leccherfeld Military Cadet Academy. His mother and sister accompanied him to Germany and stayed there for some time to allow him to adjust to the change. Just a year later, Alfred, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, died on the 30th of July 1900, and Charles Edward became the Duke. He continued his education at the University of Bonn, studying law and political science. Until he reached the age of 21, Prince Ernst, hereditary Prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, the husband of Alfred's daughter Alexandra, served as regent of the duchy. On the 15th of February 1905, during a ball, the engagement of Charles Edward and Princess Victoria Adelheid of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg was announced. Victoria Adelheid was the niece of Empress Augusta Victoria, the wife of Wilhelm II, German Emperor, and Charles Edward's first cousin. They got married on the 11th of October 1905 and had 5 children together: Johann Leopold, Sibylla, Hubertus, Caroline Mathilde, and Friedrich Josias. Charles Edward loved cars and aviation, and in 1910 he built an airplane landing site with a hangar and a flying school. In 1913 he was involved in transforming the Gotha coach factory into an airplane manufacturer. During the First World War, Charles Edward fought on the German side and was a general of the staff of the General Command of the Third Army of the German Empire. In December 1914, he was promoted to General of Infantry. To show loyalty to the German Empire, Charles Edward signed a law in 1917 that prohibited non-German members of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha from succeeding to the throne if their home country was at war with the German Empire. In 1902, he had been invested as a Knight of the Garter, but was struck off the roll in 1915, and in 1919 his British peerages and the title of Prince of the United Kingdom was removed by the British government. On the 9th of November 1918, the Workers' and Soldiers' Council of Gotha deposed Charles Edward as the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and 5 days later Charles Edward signed a declaration relinquishing his rights to the throne. After losing his throne and being branded a traitor by Britain, Charles Edward became associated with the Nazis. In 1929, after the first electoral success of the Nazi Party in Coburg, Charles Edward publicly supported them, and in 1932 he supported Hitler in his presidential election. Charles Edward was appointed to a number of positions and represented the party in Germany and abroad. He became a member of the SA and rose through the ranks. He served as president of the German Red Cross from 1933 to 1945, and it soon became separate from the International Red Cross. After Edward VIII abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, Charles Edward hosted their unauthorized trip to Germany in 1937. Although Charles Edward was too old for active service during the Second World War, all of his sons served, and his son Hubertus was killed in action in 1943. After the war had ended, Charles Edward was placed under house arrest on the 4th of June 1945. Charles Edward and his wife were moved into a stable cottage. His sister Alice and her husband pleaded for his release but were unsuccessful. They were successful in negotiating an improvement in his living conditions, and they were able to get him moved back into part of one of his houses. In 1949, Charles Edward was heavily fined and became almost bankrupt after he was classified as a Nazi follower. Charles Edward spent the rest of his life in seclusion and died of cancer on the 6th of March 1954 at the age of 69. His wife died in 1970. They were both buried in the Forest Cemetery at Saxe-Coburg.